The Anatolian highlands are silent today. Only the wind moves here, scouring the limestone ridges and pushing through the dry, yellowed grass. It is a landscape of absolute stillness, where the horizon remains unbroken for miles. But close your eyes, and the silence shifts. 3,500 years ago, this air did not hold the quiet. It vibrated. It hummed with the rhythmic, heavy strike of hammers against bronze. Thousands of them. The sound was constant, a metallic heartbeat that echoed off the canyon walls and signaled the birth of a power the world had never seen. These mountains were not just rock and dust. They were a forge. Below the surface, buried under layers of sediment and time, the earth still remembers the heat of the furnaces, and the steady, disciplined cadence of a civilization rising from the stone. The stillness of the present is a deception. It masks a history of iron, fire, and ambition that once commanded the attention of kings and gods alike. The mountains have kept their secrets well, but the echoes of those hammers remain, waiting to be heard again. The unity did not happen overnight. It began in the high, jagged valleys where isolated clans lived in perpetual competition for water and grazing land. One winter, the cycle of raiding stopped. Leaders met in the shadow of the peaks, not to trade blows, but to forge a singular, collective identity. They chose a site for their center, a rocky, defensible outcrop they called Hattusa. Thousands of hands moved the stone. They stacked massive boulders to create walls that defied the slope of the mountain. The scattered tribes became a machine. They organized their labor, standardized their bronze casting, and established a hierarchy that answered to a single throne. The mountain dwellers were no longer just survivors. They were architects of a new order. From the high citadel, the kings looked down. They saw the fertile plains of Mesopotamia stretching toward the horizon, a vast expanse of grain and wealth that sat vulnerable to the north. The Hittites tightened their grip on the highlands, secured their supply lines, and turned their collective focus toward the south. The era of the fragmented tribe was over. The Hittite ambition required more than just walls. It demanded a new way to wage war. Their engineers looked at the standard chariot of the era light, fast, and fragile, and rejected it. They needed a platform that could endure the broken, rocky ground of the highlands. They built a machine of war. These were heavy, reinforced platforms, constructed from seasoned wood and bound with bronze. Unlike the chariots of their neighbors, which carried only two, the Hittite design carried three: a driver to navigate the treacherous slopes, a shield-bearer to provide a wall of protection, and a spearman to deliver the killing blow. It was a mobile fortress. When they rolled onto the battlefield, the weight of the vehicle gave them stability that lighter chariots could not match. They could charge across uneven terrain where others slowed or broke. The shield-bearer stood firm, absorbing arrows and spear thrusts while the chariot maintained its momentum. It was a tactical innovation that turned the geography of the mountains into an advantage. Opposing forces watched as their own lighter chariots were shattered by the sheer mass of the Hittite line. The Hittites had not just built an army. They had engineered a system of total battlefield control. Every component of the chariot served a purpose, and every purpose served the goal of absolute dominance. The plains to the south were no longer a distant target. They were a destination. In 1595 BC, the mountain silence ended. The Hittite war machine descended from the highlands like a landslide, rolling across the plains toward the heart of the first Babylonian dynasty. They moved with a speed that defied the logistics of the age. Their heavy chariots chewed through the distance, leaving the dust of the Anatolian foothills behind. When they reached the gates of Babylon, they did not settle for a long siege. They struck with a singular, violent focus. The bronze-tipped spears and the weight of their reinforced platforms shattered the city defenses in a matter of days. The dynasty that had ruled for centuries collapsed under the pressure of the Hittite advance. They breached the inner sanctum, dismantled the administrative core of the city, and seized the wealth of the temples. But they did not stay to govern. Just as the shock of their arrival paralyzed the region, they vanished. They retreated back into the mountain passes, carrying the spoils of a fallen empire with them. The ancient world watched in silence, unable to comprehend the nature of an enemy. Babylon lay in ruins, its power structure erased, while the Hittites returned to their high citadels. The message was clear. The masters of the mountains were now the arbiters of the plains. By 1274 BC, the rivalry reached its boiling point at the banks of the Orontes. Thousands of chariots converged on Kadesh, a sea of bronze and wood churning the earth into a blinding fog. The air screamed with the sound of splintering axles. When the lines collided, the impact was felt like a tremor in the soil. It was a frenzy of raw, kinetic violence. Ramses II stood at the heart of the storm, his position rapidly unraveling as the Hittite chariots swarmed his flanks. The dust rose in thick, suffocating clouds, turning the midday sky into a twilight of grit and shadow. He fought to maintain his formation, but the sheer weight of the Hittite line pushed his forces back, foot by agonizing foot. Shields shattered under the relentless pressure. Spears flashed through the haze, finding gaps in the defense. The Hittites were grinding the Egyptian line into the dust of the valley, turning the field into a graveyard of broken ambition. The sun dipped low over the Orontes, illuminating a landscape defined by wreckage. Thousands of chariots lay splintered, and the once thundering plain had fallen into a heavy, unnatural stillness. Ramses II looked across the field at the Hittite lines. They were battered, their numbers thinned, yet they stood firm. The realization settled over the commanders like the cooling desert air. Neither empire possessed the strength to deliver a final, decisive blow. To continue the slaughter was to invite ruin for both. The command was given to lower the spears. The shouting ceased, replaced by the rhythmic clatter of metal being sheathed. For the first time in decades, the two superpowers did not advance. They sat. In a tent pitched between the exhausted armies, the language of war gave way to the language of law. Scribes brought forward silver tablets and clay, their style carving out terms that would echo through the centuries. The treaty was signed, and the map of the ancient world was held together by the strength of a promise. The era of stability did not end with a single battle, but with a slow, grinding decay. By 1200 BC, the Anatolian plateau began to turn against its masters. The rains failed, the soil hardened into cracked clay, and the grain stores sat empty. As the famine deepened, the complex web of trade that sustained the Hittite economy withered. Merchants stopped arriving at the gates, and the silver that once flowed through the empire dried up. Then came the reports from the coast. A mysterious force, known only as the Sea Peoples, struck the Mediterranean ports with relentless, coordinated fury. They burned the docks, sank the supply ships, and severed the lifeline to the outside world. The Hittite state, once a machine of iron and law, found itself paralyzed. The walls of Hattusa, built to withstand armies, offered no protection against the hunger that stalked the streets or the invaders that struck from the sea. The central authority disintegrated. One by one, the regional governors stopped sending tribute. The great libraries, filled with the records of centuries, were left unguarded. The city that had challenged the pharaohs fell silent, its gates left wide open to the encroaching wind. The empire was gone, replaced by the encroaching shadows. For 3,000 years, the wind and the shifting Anatolian soil claimed the remains of Hattusa. The name of the empire faded into myth, reduced to brief, confusing mentions in distant texts. The world forgot the people who had once dictated the terms of peace to the pharaohs. The stone walls settled into the earth. It was not until the early 20th century that the silence was finally broken. Archaeologists arrived at the site, their tools biting into the hardened debris that had long masked the city's scale. They worked through the heat. The breakthrough came at the Lion Gate. As they shifted the final blocks of stone, they exposed the entrance to the royal archives. Thousands of clay tablets emerged from the dark, perfectly preserved. Each piece held the records of a lost superpower. The archives spoke, proving that this was a sophisticated state. The discovery pulled a forgotten civilization back into the light. Today, the ruins of Hattusa remain, anchored to the Anatolian highlands like a stone skeleton of a forgotten giant. The wind whistles through the gaps in the masonry, carrying the grit of the mountains across the site where bronze once rang against bronze. These walls are more than just architecture. They are a testament to a people who mastered the forge and pioneered the very concept of international law. They stood toe to toe with the pharaohs, challenging the gods of the Nile and carving their will into the bedrock of history. Yet, standing among the weathered foundations, the scale of their ambition feels both immense and fragile. The iron they once wielded has long since rusted into the earth, and the treaties they inscribed on silver have vanished, leaving only the clay records to tell their story. This is the reality of the march of time. It grinds down the strongest citadels, erases the names of kings, and buries the most sophisticated empires beneath the shifting soil. The Hittites were a superpower that defined an age, only to be swallowed by the silence of the plateaus for 3 millennia. Their legacy is not found in the permanence of their borders, but in the endurance of their ideas. They prove that even the most formidable entities are subject to the cycle of rise and fall. As the sun sets over the Lion Gate, the stones serve as a final, silent reminder. Human ambition is a flicker in the dark, but the records left behind ensure that the story survives the collapse. We look at these ruins and see our own reflection, a mirror held up to the inevitable passage of centuries, showing that while empires crumble, the human drive to create remains.